All right, hi, Tasty Tarot. This is the Tasty's Tarot. Hi, Tasty Land, Tasty Gang. Sorry, guys. I'm a little discombobulated, but we're going to get right. So I'm going to go ahead and do a channel message from the book Blessings from the Other Side by Sylvia Brown. Wisdom and comfort from the afterlife for this life. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and finish the chapter called Grief. I'm on page 13. When a loved one is grieving. A loved one's grief is a hard thing to deal with, let's face it. It can be more difficult to watch someone else's pain than to go through the pain ourselves, because at least when it's our pain, we can make decisions about it, tackle it, not tackle it, and feel some sense of control, even if it's minimal. But sooner or later, unless we're hermits or cowards, we're likely to be faced with a grieving loved one and have that helpless, horrible feeling of not knowing what to do. I'll call what they're going through the dark horse of grief. I'll call what they need from us riding that horse right along with them. There are sensitive ways and insensitive ways to do that. A kind of grief etiquette, for lack of a better term, that are worth remembering and following as best you can. A person in grief is a person who's in pure survival mode. Breathing, eating, and sleeping may be about the best they can do for a while. Taking care of the basics for them without their having to ask, grocery shopping, tidying up, doing their laundry, whatever you can manage without making a pest of yourself can make an enormous difference until they care enough to start wanting to do those things for themselves again. Don't decide where their emotional needs should or shouldn't be at any given moment. Take your cues from them. Listen when they want to talk. Be quiet with them when they don't. Hold them when they want to be held, and give them their privacy when they think that somehow solitude might make the pain more bearable. It will help you to talk about it, or it will do you good to get out and see some people again. Maybe absolutely true for some people and completely wrong for others, but it's their decision to make, not yours, and you can help most by being available to support what they feel they need. Don't try to make them feel better by minimizing their loss. This is not the time to remind them of all their former complaints and frustrations about the person / pet / relationship / house / job they've lost. That amounts to expecting them to go from searing pain to "you're right, good riddance" on cue, and if they're able to do that, they genuinely need psychiatric help. Grief is a process, not just a temporary state of mind, and everyone has to work through that process in their own way, in their own time. Similarly, don't try to offer misguided perspective by topping your loved one's grief story with one of your own. As I've discussed often at lectures and in other books, I lost 9 people close to me in just 3 short months a few years ago, including most horribly my daddy, whom I adored. I was so numb with shock and sheer anguish that I barely remember much of anything from that dark, awful time, but I do remember a strange woman coming up to me at Daddy's memorial service, patting me on the back and clucking, "This is nothing, dear. I once lost both my parents and my only brother all in one bus accident." I also remember wishing I had enough energy to strangle her. I'm sure her point was that if she could survive what she'd been through, I could survive too. But even if it's just a figure of speech, no one who's emotionally devastated appreciates hearing "it's nothing" or the popular and equally ignorant alternative, "you think this is bad?" Proximity to grief can trigger some very odd reactions in us. On top of how hard it is to see someone we love in pain, we're either consciously or unconsciously aware of that grief we were born with, and the grief we're likely to go through again. So the dread of next time it could be my turn is both natural and scary. If you can rise above that natural dread and lend your support in the hope that people will do the same for you when your turn does come, great. But if you can't, if their grief causes you enough discomfort, sadness, or panic that you can't contain it in front of them, make some gesture to let them know your thoughts are with them, but then stay away. There are few worse things you can do to a loved one than put them in the position of having to comfort you through their anguish. If you suspect that your loved one might want or need some trained help with what they're going through, a minister, a rabbi, a counselor, a medical doctor, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a support group, track down and talk to some viable candidates for them before you even broach the subject. Again, you're dealing with someone who's in pure survival mode, who's performing even the most basic functions purely by rote. ROTE, suggesting You should find someone objective to talk to. It's likely to sound as overwhelming to them as suggesting, "It's such a nice afternoon. Why don't you run out and scale Mount Everest?" On the other hand, saying, "Here are the names and numbers of some people who'd love to help if you need them," makes it much easier for them to pick up the phone. Then let it be their decision, not yours. Take it from someone who's been working with grieving clients for almost a half a century. It's okay if they're reluctant or skeptical, and if you need to hold them by the hand to get them there, but ultimately they can only get meaningful help if they take the first step across the threshold by their own choice. There's no question, riding the dark horse of grief with someone you love isn't easy, but sadly, it's a challenge you're almost guaranteed to face in this lifetime. And even more sadly, it's just as likely that you're going to be that grieving loved one sooner or later. And anyone who's been through it will agree with me. I'm sure that it's the hardest challenge of all. Surviving your own grief. Surviving your own grief. As I mentioned earlier, there are those who find it odd that I grieve at all. Since I should be spiritual enough and psychic enough to know better, does my grief mean I privately question the reality of the other side and the eternal lives of our spirits? Absolutely not. I don't just believe, I know those are simple, sacred truths. Even at my most decimated, my devout spirituality never wavers for an instant. As for my psychic gifts, yes, it is a fact that I have seen and heard thousands upon thousands of spirits and angels in my lifetime, and that will continue until the day I go home and live among them again. I've made countless astral trips to the other side and helped countless clients travel there as well, so I can guarantee that it's as real as, or even more real than, this earth we're visiting now. Make no mistake about it, when I grieve, there's not a moment when I'm grieving for the loved one I've lost. I'm grieving for me. I'm grieving because I miss my daddy and my grandma, Ada, and my dear friends, and I'm selfish enough to not want them here with me, despite all the undeniable proof I have that they're still alive. Even though only 3 short feet separate us from home. As we discussed in the chapter on contacting the other side, earth and home are 2 different dimensions with 2 different vibrational levels. There's much higher than ours. Like most psychics and mediums, I was born with the ability to perceive that higher vibration. I can see and hear spirits on other levels, both ghosts who have left our level but haven't completed their transition to the other side yet, and the many more transcendent spirits who have. I've never count, but I can safely guess that I've seen and communicated with hundreds of thousands of them in my 64 years of this lifetime, as well as thousands of normal clients who have had encounters with spirits on those other levels. If grieving were really limited to worrying about whether or not our loved ones are still alive and happy, I would cheer at every funeral. It's the practical difference between the 2 dimensions that causes me to grieve. The spirits I see are not these dense gravity-bound bodies we live in while we're on earth, and their voices are quick bursts of high chirping words, distorted by the transition from one vibrational pitch to another. I'm blessed that I've seen and heard Daddy many times since he went home. I cherish the signals he sends me, from the occasional unmistakable whiff of his beloved cherry blend pipe to tobacco, to his well-timed playing of the music box he gave me, which won't make a sound on its own since I haven't wound it up in at least 20 years. But I'd be lying if I said any of that is even a pale substitute for my yearning to have him walk into this room right now, put his strong arms around me, and in his smooth baritone voice make me laugh as no one else could but him. It's selfish and ungrateful of me, but the truth is I grieve because he's on the other side having a great time, happy and healthy, and not even missing me, because as far as he's concerned, I'll be there with him in another minute or 2. While I'm stuck here living on my own chart, trying to make the most of the 30 long years I have left until he and I are living full time on the same dimension again. It always fascinates me when I'm writing. It's as if my clients find out somehow and gang up to bring me relevant contributions. No matter which subject I happen to be working on at the time, during this particular chapter, I talked to 2 separate grieving families with beautiful stories to share. All the more touching because these people didn't consider themselves extraordinary, and because both stories involve children. You may have met William and his daughter Amy right along with me at a taping of the Montel Williams show. When Amy and her twin sister were 3 years old, the sister was diagnosed with a brain tumor. She died at the age of 6, and Amy, now a young adult, has been visited by and seen the spirit of her beloved twin ever since. Almost more amazing to me, since it's a comparatively rare experience, was what William had witnessed. He was a sweet, soft-spoken, modest man, certainly not someone so eager for attention that he'd make up a good story to get himself on TV. He was afraid I'd think he was crazy, as if I'm in a position to think anyone is crazy. But William was alone with Amy's 6-year-old twin, a foot or two from her hospital bed at the moment she died, and he was blessed to actually witness her spirit, an unmistakable mist leaving her body. I remember his saying that when he looked back at her body again, he knew it was vacant. It was just the vehicle she'd occupied during her brief stay on Earth. He didn't need me to confirm that he hadn't imagined it, and that's exactly what he had seen. In fact, he wasn't asking. He was just a lovely man who wanted me in the audience to hear the exquisite news that he hadn't seen his child die at all. With his own eyes, he'd really seen his child live. 15 years later, his voice was still a mixture of joy and sorrow as he told me about it, but sorrow for her after that quiet miracle, not a chance. I was also very touched by Alexis, a quietly elegant client in her early 30s. Her 4-year-old son, Ethan, had passed on only a few weeks before I met her, after a brave battle with leukemia. In his last moments on Earth, he looked up at her with absolute peace and said, "I'm going to die, Mama. It's okay. I promise God." At Ethan's funeral, Alexis was sitting in numb shock, wondering how and if she could survive without this child who had given her life such love and purpose, when she unmistakably heard his voice whispering in her ear, strong and playful, "Mama, I'm going to kiss you on the nose," followed by a tiny, gentle breath of fresh, cool air on the bridge of her nose, exactly where the two of them made a private habit of kissing each other goodnight. It was so real it made her gasp, and she found herself smiling, filled with a rush of joy. Her friends and even her minister listened patiently and compassionately when she shared this wonderful moment with them later. And then, one by one, they assured her that grief can create all sorts of hallucinations, but if it brought her comfort to think it was real, there was probably no harm in it. "Sylvia, I was in a lot of pain," she told me, "but I wasn't far enough gone to hallucinate. It happened." Ethan talked to me and kissed me on the nose at his funeral. What I can't understand is my friends and my minister claim to believe in life after death. Ethan gave me proof that life after death is real. So how can these people turn around and insist I only imagine a sign that what they believe is true? It's a question I've asked myself a million times. Why believe in something as joyful as the fact that our spirits have eternal life, but promptly scoff at all the proof around us that we're right? Grief is excruciating enough as we face the rest of our lives without the human presence of our deceased loved one. If I didn't know with absolute certainty that our loved ones are still alive as we are, actually more alive, and that they're all around us all the time, I would just crawl into a corner, curl up in a ball, and never come out again. Another question that comes up often that I can answer, though, which both of these clients' stories remind me of, is why did God allow the innocent child or this good person to die? That's easy. He didn't. A God of perfect, eternal, unconditional love doesn't suddenly turn mean, vengeful, and sadistic and just swoop down and take us against our will as some kind of cruel hobby. No, like everything else in our lives, as we'll discuss in the chapter, charting our life's purpose, we make that choice. Yes, even children whose spirits are as ageless and fully developed as ours on the other side, we all chart the timing and the circumstances of our trip home before we come here. So please, when you're facing the utter despair of losing a loved one, don't add to your grief by worrying about their well-being. My book, Life on the Other Side, can offer you a detailed description of where they are and what they're doing. But the bottom line is, like everyone else at home, they're happy. They're in perfect health. They're busy. They're surrounded by countless friends from many lives. They love you completely and unconditionally. If there were any hard feelings between you, they're completely forgotten and understood. They visit you often, whether you feel them or not. And as far as they're concerned, the two of you will be together again in no time at all, and they're probably already planning the party for your reunion. Whatever part of your grief is about them, I promise it's safe to let it go and limit your pain to how terribly you miss them. And by the way, there's an old wives' tale that when we grieve, we bind our loved one's spirit to earth and keep it from transcending to its rightful place on the other side. Believe me when I tell you that's not true, but I can tell you where it came from. For one thing, as I also described in Life on the Other Side, our loved ones go through several different orientation processes when they first arrive back home. So in many cases, they're temporarily unavailable until they finish their orientation. For another thing, one of the many awful effects of grief is that it throws us into such a numb state of sorrow that we're often blocked from any ability we might have to sensitive visits from our loved ones until we're starting to heal and recover. I saw my cherished grandma Ada almost immediately after she died, but it took Daddy 8 months to show up. And knowing me as he did, it didn't surprise him one bit when I greeted him with the relieved but impatient, "What the hell took you so long?" So don't let it throw you if you don't notice signs from your loved one right away. They have their orientation to deal with. You have your grief to deal with, but it's guaranteed that sooner or later they'll be with you again. And all you have to do is keep an open mind and pay attention. All right, guys, that is the Tastiest Tarot signing off for part 2 from the chapter Grief from Sylvia Browne's book, Blessings from the Other Side, Wisdom and Comfort from the Afterlife for this life. Thank you guys for tuning in. I hope that helped you guys. I hope that relaxed you, and I hope you got your channel messages from there and answered questions. Thank you guys for tuning in. This is the Tastiest Tarot. Don't forget to comment on my video, like my video, and subscribe to my channel, and share my content if you think it's feasible. Goodbye, guys.